Erin Boyd Kappelhof, welcome to Everything But the Carbon Sink with me, Eva Goldborn. I'm so grateful to have you here today. I'm realizing you and I are part of the Imagine community together,
Yes.
which is
Fellow
a global,
travelers.
global community for impact. We are in the Google Food Lab together. And most importantly, you're CEO of Eat Well Global, which is a consultancy focused on a lot of different tenets of nutrition and diets.
Yep.
I would love for you to share more about what you and your team do, the services that you provide, and the impact that you're sort of driving towards in your work.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is so fun. So yeah, Eat Well Global is a strategy and communication agency for the food and health industries, and really what we're trying to do is drive demand for better food. And we do that with insights-based strategies, and that means, kind of sounds a little bit confusing, what does that exactly mean? But we have kind of upstream and downstream ways that we drive impact. And so when you think about the upstream, think about, say, a multinational food company. They would come to us looking for support and help when they're trying to develop their big story, their big ambition when it comes to healthy, sustainable diets. So we work a lot with organizations when they're trying to define who do they want to be when they grow up, when it comes to health, when it comes to nutrition, and more these days, how do those worlds combine with sustainability? And that's really important. And so setting that foundation, who do we want to be, how do we make that happen, how does that make sense within our business operations is kind of the first step, and then figuring out, where do we go from here? Is there a portfolio transformation strategy that needs to happen? Do we need to look at the innovation pipeline and how we're thinking about what we want to produce in the future? Do we need to look at divestment or acquisition? How do we think about our portfolio and what we're offering today? So that's kind of on the upstream side.
Okay.
And then
That's a helpful.
when you think about downstream, there's a lot of misinformation going on in the world when it comes to health and nutrition.
Yep.
So brands or even commodity boards will come to us looking for support to get credible information out there into the public. We're not a consumer marketing agency per se, but we do a lot of work with health influencers and thought leaders and key opinion leaders when it comes to health and nutrition. Everything's science-based, everything's really evidence-based, so that's a really important piece. So that's the upstream and that's the downstream of what we do. And then we'll also work with other organizations like, say, philanthropies or global health organizations or trade associations on some cross-cutting themes. So think about like food as medicine or large-scale food fortification or workforce nutrition. Those are topics that bring a lot of these pieces together. It's labor, it's workforce, it's recruitment and retention, but it's also ensuring that healthy, sustainable foods are affordable for people, are accessible, they're getting them where they are, whether that's in a healthcare setting, whether that's in a school setting, whether that's in a workplace. So a lot of those kind of cross-cutting issues we work on as well.
Thank you for that overview, and I think that sort of helps place all of your amazing work in sort of this larger nutrition space. I want to ask you too if you've seen, especially from the corporate side, either up or downstream, I don't think this one necessarily matters, but either an uptick or downtick in, they're all making public commitments around, sustainability issues, food loss and waste, net carbon zero, virgin plastics, all of those components, and simultaneously this focus on nutrition. Are you seeing an uptick in asks and curiosity because of some of those commitments recently, or a downtick in terms of, they're like, oh my gosh, we have so many different tenets of our strategy, like we don't know what it looks like. How are you sort of seeing those public commitments affecting this type of work?
It's pretty interesting. These issues are interconnected, but most organizations don't think about them that way yet.
Yeah.
So
even what teams even do you work
exactly.
with? Within?
So on the health and nutrition side, we're often working with R&D teams, innovation teams. It kind of depends on the organization. Sometimes it's coming from marketing if they want to set their ambition for who they want to be. On the sustainability side, you know how sustainability falls into a lot of different corporate structures. It's different in every organization. But typically those people are separate. Those people and those teams are working completely independently. Sometimes we introduce them to each other.
Oh my gosh.
So I think,
and they have different KPIs, different budgets,
different everything.
yeah.
But I think one of the really interesting opportunities now is that we see the issues are interconnected, the solutions are interdependent, and so some companies are starting to put that together and are appointing people to kind of oversee both. So we want to see more of that. That's a really great thing. And oversee both more than just on a communication standpoint. That narrative is really important. But on the business side, like how do we integrate these goals? It's efficiency when you think about it. If you have a sustainability goal and you have a health and well-being goal, but actually to achieve both those things, you're doing some of the same things. Join forces. You can kind of find efficiencies there. And then some of the really interesting themes that are popping up that are stimulating this conversation are things like the connection between regenerative agriculture and nutrient density. So there's a lot of really exciting
soil
stuff.
Health and human health.
Yes, there's a lot of excitement there. The research is mounting, so there are some gaps, but also a ton of momentum, and we see that directionally really happening. So there's a lot of really interesting smaller producers that are testing and learning and finding out that the changes they make within their regenerative agriculture operations are actually having an impact on the nutrient density of the foods they're producing, and that's pretty amazing.
And I feel like that's the golden ticket that so many of us are sort of hoping for and waiting for, because that unlocks the business case even further for this type of work.
For sure, yeah. It definitely unlocks the business case for brands that have that health positioning already. But at the end of the day, people aren't eating more vegetables because they're not healthy enough. You're not eating, you're not eating broccoli because it doesn't have enough whatever nutrient. It also, yeah, right. Like we all, every country under the sun, all consumers need to eat more produce, more fruits and vegetables. That's one universal truth when it comes to health and nutrition. So there are a lot of other quality attributes to regenerative agriculture that I think are going to be exciting to see, that are even more compelling to more consumers, like taste and flavor. I think that's really, really interesting too.
I want a tomato to taste like a tomato again.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's even part of that narrative. We're here at the ReFed Summit, so I would be remiss in not talking to you about food loss and waste. And because you are so deep in the dietary nutrition and health space, but you're here at ReFed, I feel like that's a triumph for the food system space, that these, because somebody like you, for many years before this, we wouldn't have been thinking about health and nutrition when we're talking about food waste. So you sort of like represent this success, I think, in sort of connecting the dots. What are some of the interconnections and sort of issue areas, and maybe it's GLP-1s that you want to speak to, that sort of like reintegrate these topics that, again, we know that they're part of the exact same system, but they're dealt with typically completely differently.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it's exciting to be here. This is my first time at the ReFed Summit, so I'm learning a ton, and I'm getting to meet all kinds of fascinating people that are doing really innovative work. But when you think about food loss and waste, that ultimate goal of rescuing that food or preventing that food to go to waste is so that it can serve the highest purpose, which is to nourish people and to get that nutrition into people's mouths and bellies and make sure we have a nourished population. So theoretically, that makes sense, I think, for people. But then on the practical side, what's happening with consumer behavior today, it's really interesting. The GLP-1 phenomenon is truly a phenomenon. So, I mean, there are estimates that 30 million Americans will be taking these drugs by 2030. I think I heard a stat this morning that it might be even 50 million. So for those people who don't know, these are the weight loss drugs, GLP-1 agonists. They have historically been used to treat diabetes, but they are very effective at helping people lose weight. So they're becoming very, very popular for that reason as well. And so
essentially by suppressing appetite, right?
Yes.
So as in eating less food.
For sure. People are less hungry. So we're seeing that in the restaurant setting, for example, people are pushing their plates away after they just have a little bit of it. And so that's a food waste problem. Yeah. That's an economic problem, and it's a nutrition problem. So if restaurants can start to think about how can we offer more flexible portion sizes, it's not about shrinking everything down and charging more, because that won't fly. We know consumers, still want bang for their buck. They want to have, an affordable meal, but giving people the option to have a smaller portion size. And that's a little bit of a rethink for the restaurant industry as well, because more is better has always been the case.
Yeah, the perceived value of that.
And now we're hearing that actually consumers want to be helped in this area as well.
I'm encouraged to hear that too, because in the food waste world, we're always talking about smaller plates, smaller portions, trayless dining, all of these things to sort of help encourage, you don't need to eat less, but don't put a huge trough of, food in front of you the first time. Our eyes are always bigger than our stomachs. And so to layer in this GLP-1 and an actual medication to really push even further, it's like, well, let's take whatever wins we can get in sort of, aligning those, because we've been, hitting the drum on that for a long time. And the pushback from restaurants and food service is, their brand reputation, perception of value, where they're like, I'm not going to do that because we're known for rich, delicious, hearty portions. We're a family style restaurant. Like, we can't be giving people, little tiny this, that, or the other thing. But the fact that they're getting social license from the customer to be like, hey, help me out here, because, we can't do this alone. I think that's really encouraging. I also am curious in this conversation with you too, in terms of, I'm very focused on the business case around all of the, whether it's ESG, food loss waste, whatever it might be. We're never going to get to scale on a lot of these components, and even what I'm starting to call sort of like pilot purgatory, to even on like the regen side as well, where a lot of good effort and investment going in exploring a lot of these issues, and then it's sort of getting stuck right before scale, because everybody's like, well, what's the business case? Why should we be doing this? How are you thinking about that and addressing that with your clients and sort of in your space from the nutrition and health lens? Because it's obvious in so many ways. It's like, well, this is what we should be doing, and that's not good enough for anybody. It has to be down to the dollars and cents. How are you looking at that?
Yeah, and that's kind of the business model for Eat Well Global in general. It's not about the moral imperative. It's what are the business levers that we can find. And so it's really two things. One is on the risk mitigation and resilience side. So we all know that resilient food systems, there's a lot of cracks in the supply chain that need to be addressed. And so making sure that the ingredients that you want to offer are actually going to be there is an important piece to look at. And then also, when it comes to health and nutrition, there's so many pressures, new pressures, extra pressures on companies right now to provide a healthy option. And so getting ahead of regulation is something that companies can do, and that's a business case. So that's mitigating their risk. And then the consumer demand side, we just did a new consumer survey of 3,000 Americans, and we found that almost 80% of them are saying that healthy and sustainable diets, they're looking for healthy, nutritious options all the time when they're shopping and when they're looking for food. And that number has jumped up in the last few years.
Are they willing to pay more for it?
Well, that's the question, and that's always the criticism. There's that say do gap, right? That people say they're going to do that, but then what do they do? But that's also the challenge back to the food industry, to make things that are a little bit more affordable and a little bit more accessible, because your customers are asking for it. So if they can do anything, they can provide these, options at a more affordable price. So it's an opportunity, I think, for innovation too, to make sure that healthy foods are affordable and taste great, and don't call them healthy, because people just want to know that they taste great, and the ones that are looking for healthier options, they know what to look for. So
we can look on the back of the label and sort ourselves out. I think that's such a good point too, of sort of this like othering that happens, or sort of over characterizing in different attributes around food, almost to our detriment, and like even thinking about vegetarian, vegan movement, and focused on all the things that I can't have and the things that I have to take out of my diet, instead of all the beautiful, delicious, healthy options that I can have. And I think that plays a huge role, it seems like, in terms of moving out of the scarcity mindset into that abundance mindset and allowing customers to feel that. As we close out this conversation, and thank you, now I feel like I have a little bit more footing under me on the health and nutrition side. As you're, sort of what's next for you in terms of how you're looking at this space, and you've sort of implied and said too that moving these two worlds together, health, wellness, nutrition, and then sustainability need to come together. So what does that look like for you moving forward?
Yeah, it is exactly that. We're working to help companies kind of bring these issues together in the spirit of future-proofing their portfolio. So back to the business case, companies need to know that they are going to be relevant in the future. And so everything we do is going to revolve around that future-proofing and making sure that better food is really craveable and that there's demand for that. So that's really everything we'll be focusing on from here on out. But it's really fun to be here and talk to folks who are getting, a different, looking at a different angle of it altogether.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Which I think that's probably going to give a lot of, good sorts of inspiration and energy over the next few days. Well, thank you, Erin, for having this conversation with me.
Thank you.
This was so wonderful.